On this day in 1941, two prized pillocks raced each other to see who could declare war on America first. I kid you not. I kid you not. There are some topics which I find frankly disturbing sometimes to talk about. This is not one of them, because I just find it an absolute hoot, the way some of the things go on. And I mean, it is worth pointing out it is a bit of a hoot. They do really do some stupid things. Some absolutely, tremendously stupid things. And, you know, humans are gonna human. They always do, but... yeah. This was a particularly visible part of the history where, and I'm making sure questions are open before we even begin, where the humans doing the humaning really needed to think a bit more. Sorry, I've spent most of the day in the attic and various other places getting things like Christmas decorations down. They're not up yet, I've just got them down and sorted them out, but you know, these things happen, so I'm a bit covered in dust. However, I have Iron Brew. Which is my thinking juice of choice. Just clarifying for those again, because someone has asked this again. Let's see. It's a sparkling flavoured soft drink with sugar and sweeteners. Ingredients: carbonated water, sugar, acid, citric acid, flavourings including caffeine, ammonia, ferric acid, ammonia, ferric citric, and quinine. Sweeteners: aspartame, asulfaltine, K, preservatives, E211, various colours. Yeah. May have an adverse effect on activity and attention in children. Thank goodness there's not one of them drinking it there. Stopped being one of those a long time ago. There again, to be fair, I first drank Iron Brew when I was like 2 months old, so... I wasn't supposed to be given it. Please note. I had a grandfather who was very upset I was not being allowed to have whiskey. And so he snuck me something else, which was pure Scottish, to help out. Yeah. My grandfathers. How could I best describe them? Physical age, somewhere in the 80s to 90s to 100s, depending on the period we're talking about. Mental age, they never got past the sense of humour of a 5-year-old, and they were happy with it. So, why did Germany and Italy declare war on the USA, and what happens if they don't? So, as is always when I'm doing an alternate history, and this is an alternate history which I have proposed. This is the first one that has come from me for a long time, but it's rather a fun one to talk about, so I thought it was suitable for Christmas, because it gets quite hilarious as you go through them. We're going to do the history up until the Shameless Book Plug, and then after the Shameless Book Plug, we'll do the alternate history. Okay? So it's, why did Germany and Italy declare war on the USA, and what happens if they don't? So first part is, why did Germany and Italy declare war? And the second part is, what happens if they don't? Growing up is overrated. Anyway. So, here's the point about 11th of December 1941, or the 11th of December throughout history. It's a rather crowded day. Okay? I'm not sure what it is about the 11th of December. I don't know what it is, but I thought, well, so much happens on the 11th of December, let's make this a bit of a point. 11th of December 1941. This is 5 years to the day after the abdication of Edward VIII became effective. 4 years since Italy had left the League of Nations over the Second Italo-Ethiopian War. 4 days after the attack of Pearl Harbor, Hitler and Mussolini declare war on the USA. But why? Why did they do it? And here is the question I want you to all think about. And this is the reason I'm starting off this is, why do you think Italy and Germany declared war? Why do you think Hitler and Mussolini declared war? Why do you think they did it? Before we get into discussion, before we go on, and we're going to have a slide devoted to each of them as we go through, why? Why would they do this? Why would anyone do this in this scenario? They are already fighting on multiple fronts. They're already heavily engaged. Why declare war on the United States? Why? Treaty obligations. Yeah, coming in. Prestige stuff. Pride. Hitler's ego. Germany, Italy. Normally seen as less than Germany. Here's the fun thing. Italy actually declares war before Germany does. Mussolini wins the race with Hitler. He declares war before Germany does. I kid you not. Also, I can tell you this. Whilst I will probably be reading through and discussing Mussolini's oratory of his 4-minute soliloquy about why he's declaring war, I am not touching with a 10-foot barge pole the 90-minute dirge of despair and desultory language, even when it's translated to English, let alone in its actual German, what Hitler did. And Hitler said, because frankly, I just don't have the patience with that. I just don't. I've read it a few times. You can quite easily Google it and find the entire text. If you want to have a very serious desire to go and hit someone over the head for actually running a country, the question is, because there are so many reasons that Hitler should not have been in charge of a country. Reading those 90 minutes, you're just sitting going, I don't know how you actually got in charge of the country. I really don't. Opportunities. Dictators doing dictatoring. Idealism, America's weakened. Lots of ideas coming in. They thought the US would not be able to do much. Honestly, this is one of the things that comes through in all the writing time. How the amount of times you hear dictators basically going, "Oh, these countries are soft." I will put up a warning now. I'm going to occasionally use the language which was used by the dictators to describe things. It's not language I would personally use. So please, YouTube gods and everyone else, don't try and ban me for this. But the favourite line which comes out of Hitler's Germany is that, well, the Americans are weak and soft. They listen to that Negro-inspired music. You mean jazz? Yeah, Negro-inspired music. You mean jazz, right? Negroes. Couldn't you just say jazz? It's actually less words. It's actually less syllables, less letters. It's easier to pronounce than having to go through. Instead, you could say just one. No, you are so petty and insulting. You have to say 3 words rather than 1. And it goes on. But these are a list of reasons why they think America is weak and isn't worth worrying about. And speaking as a jazz trombonist, because that's what I spent a lot of my young youth doing in my spare time, playing the trombone in a big band and a few other little sort of smaller jazz bands, etc. Knowing that music really, really upset Hitler just added to my enjoyment of it on some level. I don't know why, but it did. It just did. Stephen Meyer, because great powers do not have war declared upon them. Oh yeah, that one comes up quite a bit. That one comes up quite a bit. So this is, of course, Roosevelt declaring the war back on them, because even when one power declares war on you, until you actually sign the forms to declare war back on them, they're technically at war with you, but you're not technically at war with them. This is the fundamental problem we're going to be dealing with a lot today. There is a lot of duality, and this is one of the reasons why I asked you to start off here by putting in the chat what your ideas of why you think why they declared war, what the issues were. Realistically, the problem is that you are dealing with people who fundamentally are bullies. Okay, this is something I worked out a long time ago, because bullies tend to attack people to make themselves feel big by pushing down others because they actually feel small. This is why you get the duality when Italy and Germany are talking about, or Japan, to a lesser extent Japan. Japan's a bit of a different case. Italy and Germany, and especially the fascist and the Nazi, parties, when they're talking about these things, this is why you get the duality of them being both the most evil and the most weak of our opponent. Honestly, if you listen to some of the speeches by Hitler about America in this period, it's kind of like listening to some of the speeches that come out of Russia moment about the UK. Where if UK was as strong and as powerful and as organised and as diligently diplomatically and in the foreign policy wise as sometimes we're claimed to be by the people in the Russian media, I would be so happy. I mean, I would love us to be that capable. I would be absolutely rocking my socks if we were that capable. We're not. But then other times I'm hearing how we are absolutely destroyed and we're on the verge of civil war and all these other things, and you sit there and go, we're not there either. Now, me and Gareth the Brit had a nice long conversation on Myths of World War I the other day, and we basically, that was recorded and came out yesterday, I think. And basically, the point about, the general point we did about leadership was, you've got lions led by donkeys, which is wrong and is an extreme on one end, and you've got they're all perfect on the other end, which is extreme on the other end, and both wrong, and the reality is somewhere in the middle. It's the same with nations' abilities. But the thing is, what you seem to get coming out of the mantra in this period is they can either perceive things as being one or the other. They can't see the middle bit in the grey. And this is where I think authoritarian governments tend to slip up. Authoritarian governments tend to be very black and white. This is what's written, this is what we do. And their perception of the governments which weren't authoritarian was they were weak. Why were they weak? Because they have nuance, because they have context, because they have the grey areas, because they don't do those things. And, well, this is a problem. This is a problem. This is one of the reasons why, again, because they're black and white, it's very easy for authoritarian regimes to appear strong and powerful and present, and all those things. Because it's very simple. The command structure is very, very easy. Very, ooh, we're here. Whereas when you're a democracy and you live in nuance and context, you have to balance a lot of different opinions, and you're always going to have a lot of loud voices. And you have this thing usually called the silent majority. I don't like the phrase silent majority. I usually use the phrase people just living their lives. I.e., everything's running along, broadly speaking, okay. There's nothing particularly causing us too much trouble that we're going to be incited by it. We're just going to get on with living our lives. We have kids to raise. We have bills to pay. We have a house which constantly needs maintenance. I don't have kids at the moment, but I do have a house, and I have dogs, and I have a car which was involved in a flash flood incident the other day. And after pulling my sister out of that car and getting us both to safety and making sure we're okay, car is now being recovered as with the mechanics, and I'm probably going to be having to buy a new car in the new year. But leaving that to one side, and all those things on one side, I can understand when you have all that going on in your life that you just don't have the time for getting involved in politics. And so it's very easy, especially in a democracy where there are lots of loud voices, but you don't hear from the majority, for it to look like it's a fractured society. But whereas in an authoritarian regime, you still have a large majority of people who frankly don't care, they're just getting on with their lives. But you only usually have less loud voices because they chop down the other ones. And so it can look far more disciplined, far more structured, far more purpose. Because you only hear one voice. But that's not good. That's not good. No. I will say this because this is my one little point on all this thing before we get into it too much. When I end up with discussions with people about whether a particular monogroup is fascist or not, or Nazi and these things, I sit there and go, okay, you need to first define what it is and where it's going to fit with those groups. But also, there is also another problem, in that quite a lot of politics, modern politics, seems to have moved into gerontocratic politics, where you have the 90-year-olds having discussions about forming committees, have discussions about which of the 80-year-olds should retire to allow which of the 70-year-olds to advance to leadership. Modern politics is getting very old. And one of the reasons why I think you sometimes hear banned-out music coming from modern politicians is because, well, as we all know, most old people do not always enjoy new music. They just don't. They want the music of their youth because it makes them feel young. New music makes them feel outdated. That's my part. That's my pennyworth. It's not authoritarianism. It's gerontocracy run amok. Okay, I'm trying to put some levity into this discussion because there is going to be attempts to put a lot of levity into this discussion because it's quite a serious topic, but it's also quite a stupid topic, as I said. Mussolini was actually in a race with Hitler as to who was going to get this out first. And that face he pulled is actually the picture. Look at the Japanese ambassador in that picture. He's sitting there going, "Oh my God, what's happening?" People might think that's the Japanese inscrutable face. No, that isn't. Having spent a month in Japan, I can tell you that is the face a Japanese person pulls when they are really not sure what the frigate is going on and why you dragged them here. They're just going, "Oh God." If they were in a Disney movie, we'd say that was their deer in headlights moment. Literally. That face is that. So, here's what he said in 4 minutes, and I'd like you to time me to see if it takes me 4 minutes to say it, or if I can say it quicker. This is another day of solemn decision in Italy's history and of memorable events destined to give a new course to the history of continents. The powers of the Steel Pact, Fascist Italy, National Socialist Germany, ever closely linked, participate from today on the side of heroic Japan against the United States of America. The Tripartite Pact becomes a military alliance which draws around its colours 250 million men determined to do all in order to win. Neither the Axis nor Japan wanted an extension of the conflict. One man only, a royal tyrannical democrat, through a series of infinite provocations, betraying with a supreme fraud the population of his country, wanted the war and had prepared for it day by day with diabolical obstinacy. The formidable blows that on the immense Pacific expense have all been already inflicted on American forces show how prepared are the soldiers of the Empire of the Rising Sun. I say to you, and you will understand, that it is a privilege to fight with them. Today, the Tripartite Pact, with the plenitude of its forces and its morale and material resources, is a formidable instrument for the war and a certainty for victory. Tomorrow, the Tripartite Pact will become an instrument of just peace between the peoples. Italians, once more, arise and be worthy of this historical hour. We shall win! Now, just a few issues here. One, he doesn't say much in there. It's a load of rhetoric without anything in that's really worthwhile. 250 million men, I'm not quite sure. I'm thinking there's a lot of maths being added in here. A lot of interesting things being added in there. Also, a tyrannical democrat. Okay, he's got the right political party, but tyrannical democrat? A guy who just been elected in 1940? Okay, it's an interesting turn of phrase. Infinite provocations, not that wrong, let's be honest, we'll be getting into those. But realistically, none of those provocations have really affected Italy. In fact, let's be honest, if you start looking at these things, and you start looking at the stuff that's going on, Italy is probably the one which is least affected. By the American involvement in prior to this point in World War II, and what they've been getting up to. And sorry, I have put my phone down somewhere. There it is. And this is the thing. Mussolini is getting all bent out of shape, and he is bent out of shape. He's not exactly been in shape, but he's been. This is coming from someone who's fellow on the. I spend far too much time. I enjoy my food far too much and spend far too much of my life sitting down. Club, but you know, Mussolini really is here. I would say is. Justifying with rhetoric what he cannot justify with prose. I need to bang my fist more. I did need to bang my fist more in that, didn't I? But the trouble is, if I bang my fist, it shakes the camera, and that looks wrong. Look, the fun thing about this all, and there are some fun things going on in this one, with the Italian. The Italian declaration of war, and oh, good lord, I still feel sorry for that poor Japanese ambassador. By the way, for anyone who's not quite sure about the details, this is taken on this is literally his speech at Palazzo Venezia, Rome, in Italy. It gets worse the more you look at it. The fact that they push so many people in there, they They crowded people into the plaza to make it look like it was a huge crowd and really pushed them in to get as many people there as possible. The thing is, I would say for Mussolini, he has this real fear of missing out. Okay? I'd say his whole reasoning for declaring war is his FOMO. He's fearing of missing out, and he's fearing of looking like he's the weaker power. He's the small power. He's the baby power. And Japan has also stung him a bit because they've scored some quite interesting naval victories almost at the beginning of the get-go of the battle of the war. And that's a problem for him, because up until this point, let's be honest, the leading naval power of the Axis forces had been Italy. Okay, yeah, Germany's building up a submarine fleet and doing the stuff they are doing in the North Atlantic, and yes, they've been doing all the things they have been doing. But the power which is tying down the bulk of the Royal Navy, the power in terms of its major assets, the power which has got the most capital ships, the most cruisers, and is able to mount the most effective task forces, is Italy. Italy is a very capable naval power. And now Japan's entered the war. And again, I will remind you that pineapple on pizza was not an American invention, it was a Canadian one. It is their ongoing desire to commit more and more interesting war crimes. So, yeah, it might be that the Americans are getting blamed for the Hawaiian pizza, but I don't think so. The thing is, there's also, one of the reasons why it's delayed as long as it is because they actually are coordinating. Italy and Germany are coordinating on this declaration of war. And it's predicted, actually, that if Germany declares war, Italy would do likewise. And I think part of the reason why Mussolini is charging as fast as he is to avoid being seen as Hitler's lackey. If he declares war first, then he wins the race, and it's Germany joining him in declaring war. So Italy declares war on America first. They declare war at 2:45 p.m. That's 14:45 hours. And it's a really tight, it's a really tight schedule. But it's also the fact that on the same day, one of the reasons I also wait till 11th December is because they sign a agreement between the three powers, between the tripartite pact, that there be no separate peace. That they would negotiate collectively or not at all. And one of the interesting things that keeps coming is that Mussolini seems to be completely swept up in the rhetoric. Now, here is another point, and I would like to point this out to you. He does this during the middle of Operation Crusader, which we'll be talking about later in this video, but Operation Crusader is going pretty well for the Allies at this point. In December the 11th, 1941, Operation Crusader is pretty much kicking the Italians across the Italians in the Africa Corps across the North African desert. It is doing nasty things. And so, we're talking about this more when we get to Hitler, but there is part of me which wonders whether or not the declaration of war thing they've got going on is to try and see some momentum. To try and get back control. Because both Germany and Italy seem to realise that the longer the war goes on, the less and less it's on their side. We talk about America getting involved in war, but there's also Canada, there's Australia, there's India. They're all having major industrial growth to support the war effort. Lots of things are going on around the world to support the war effort, and lots of those were involved in the war long before America joins. And they are growing up. And yes, America is a massive arsenal of democracy, and we'll get onto that in a second, but the fact is, even without America being as helpful as it was, the sheer amount of weight of infrastructure and industry that the British are bringing to bear from across the world, which they're able to marshal thanks to their control of the sea, is causing trouble for the Axis forces. They've invaded Russia, and instead of Russia collapsing, Russia has dug in. And winter has come. And again, they have lost the momentum. They're on the defensive in Russia because of the winter. They're on the defensive there. They're on the defensive in North Africa. It's just, yeah, this is about them trying to look like they are strong, that they're still dictating the war effort. It's non-stop. It's a total war they're in. It is a total war. And various operations are working against them. They are dealing with the stuff which is happening to them, and this is causing I'm trying to get in and capture it, but they're having real trouble controlling the narrative at this point. And the thing is, both Mussolini and Hitler are narrative thinkers. They like to have a narrative. They like to they are true people who go around the world imagining themselves as the star in their own movie. They really do. And the thing about being the star, the main character in your movie, is the whole plot revolves around you. And let's be honest, with Japan attacking Hawaii and Pearl Harbor, and that war growing in the Far East, and Britain already jumping in because Japan's attacking it, and other. The war wasn't about them at this point. No one cared. No one was taking any notice of Hitler or Mussolini at this point. They were too busy dealing with the Japanese. They were too busy dealing with the other things. They had a handle on these ones. They knew them. They were dealing with them. That didn't matter. They were concentrating on something new, and these two were both going, but what about me? They are the people who on the internet to this day, and we see this a lot on the internet, who have to be outraged about everything so that the story becomes about them. This is part of it, I swear. Mussolini and Hitler were involved with declaring war in part because the narrative wasn't about them. For 4 days, no one had cared about them. They were too busy dealing with other things. This is like a level of ego you're dealing with. They feel left out. Yes, Lions, they do. They are toddlers having a tantrum. And then we have Germany. Oh, this picture's probably going to get me demonetized. This is the point. Nice way. I'm doing this video, and I'm happy to do this video, but I know I know the amount of stuff in here, which is the iconography in here, is going to get me into trouble with YouTube. So, I've been waiting for it for a while. Hitler. Well, Hitler has a list of things. Honestly, the fact is, I'm surprised with Hitler he managed to hold off on declaring war on America as long as he did. I'm to this day surprised he didn't try and declare war on America during their election cycle. I really think he should have done that whole declaring war during the election cycle. There are so many points where you could justify it. You know, there's the fact that American destroyers are sinking German submarines in defense of the Neutrality Patrol / Pan-American Security Zone. Yeah, 3 submarines have been sunk by different destroyers. You sit there and go, okay, you could have declared war for those reasons. You could have declared war because of the Destroyers for Bases deal. Because the Atlantic Charter, which basically, you know, was an alliance in all but name. The handover of Iceland for its security to America. So Britain had invaded Iceland. And when we call it an invasion, thank you, my coach. When we call it an invasion, that's really overstating the matter. It's not an invasion. It is the British turn up and go, hello, right then, we're fairly certain that if we don't do this, the Germans will invade you, as they've done that to Norway. So we're going to take you, but we're going to do the most lackluster invasion known to man. We are basically garrisoning you more than invading you. We're going to spend a lot of time buying stuff from the locals and importing stuff and doing those sort of things. And, yeah, at a certain point, the British then hand that job over to the Americans of garrisoning Iceland, and I think the Americans are there to this day, garrisoning Iceland. Because the Greenland-Iceland-UK gap is still pretty important. Anyone who's seen recent newspapers from the UK, once again, we're talking about the GI-UK gap. Once again, we are suddenly abandoning east of Suez. But once again, that's the government's policy. They can't possibly go, okay, right now we might need to actually put some more money into defense to do both. No, we have to do one or the other. So, you know, there are lots of good reasons going on here. The cash and carry approach to selling to allies, realistically, here's the thing about the cash and carry approach to the selling allies. Theoretically, not realistically, but theoretically, the Germans could have done the same. But the trouble is they couldn't get there to get it. And the point is, all these are very, very strong cases to make for the Germans to declare war. Germany has suffered hundreds of provocations by this point to declare war. And the trouble is, realistically, Roosevelt has been loading the bases as far as he can to support the Allies against Hitler, against the fascist dictatorships, as best he can, because ultimately, I would say, Roosevelt doesn't want in the war if he can avoid getting in there. But he also doesn't want Britain to lose the war. He does not want an authoritarian Germany linking up with a Britain which is under their control or anything like that. He doesn't want a scenario where he is facing a united fascist Europe which is all ruled from Germany and includes the British Empire. He doesn't want to be dealing with that because that is going to be a problem for America. Basically, Roosevelt is quite happy to let others fight the war and help fund it and support it that way if he can. I'll agree, the UK did pay back their World War I debts. In fact, we finished paying them off not that long ago. So, yeah, Euler Greg, that's not true. Britain paid off all their World War I debts and had been paying them back consistently. At that point, they were paying them down quite fast in the 20s and 30s. That's one of the reasons they didn't spend the money on defence they did in that period, and one of the reasons why they kept the 10-year rule going as long as they did, because it was allowed them to spend money on paying down debts, and then they actually paid them all that. So yeah, that's just wrong. That's one of the reasons why the British have such a good credit rating to take on more debt during World War II, because we had been paying down our debts in World War One. We get huge loans and huge things. One of the things that's often forgotten is that prior to Lend-Lease, everything's paid for by cash, which is often paid for by a mixture of loans and by Britain using gold and various other reserves. So yeah. No, they did pay their debts. Bonds and the debts the British incurred were slightly different things, but they paid both. Both were paid off a long time ago. Anyway, yeah, government bonds are most government debt is bonds. The other thing is gilt occasionally. Yeah. But all was paid off. But with that being said, with these things going on, there are lots of reasons for Hitler to want to declare war. But he's not. Albert Green, you've now said World War II. They didn't know. Wow. So I'm guessing Euler Greg and Black Powder 416. I don't think I've ever seen you before, so I think you're trying to either blow the stream up and put it off track on something completely different topic, or you're alternatively bots causing trouble, because that's the two things I can see from coming in here and trying to start a debate on a completely different topic in the chat. That's my assessment. So yeah. And yeah. All paid off. There were lots of defaults in 1934. Lots of defaults, but that doesn't really matter, does it? I think France defaulted before then, as well, or after. It was around time, but there's a global economic crash, but then it was all sorted out after that as well. And, yeah. But again, we're in the middle of talking about one other thing, and you want to talk about something else completely different. Which is kind of not in the spirit of the topic, but you know, hey ho. We're talking about Nazi Germany and their reasons for wanting to go to war and the issues with the thing, and you're bringing up a whataboutism on terms of British debt. No, Euler Greg, you're throwing off the topic, and I'd like to know why. Honestly, I consider it. It's you wanted to bring this up, and you want to keep it on air, and yeah. When one of the things is there are debts defaulted, etc. on. I do admit that. I think it's roughly the agreed default was about $4 billion, possibly something along those figures, in 1934. But there's lots of agreed defaults because, frankly, you have a global crash. No, Black Powder, Ollie Gregg, you have wanted to talk about this topic, not tonight's topic. You want to talk about something else. So we're talking about it. It's one of those things of, we're talking about Germany's reasons for declaring war on Britain and declaring war on America. No, Euler Greg, it's not I don't believe it, it's that I know the evidence and facts as I've learnt over the years. It's not about belief, it's about what's the factually correct historical one. And there are interpretations, and people do like to play on these things, but the stuff was paid off. There are defaults by a lot of people in 1934 because of the global economic crash. A lot of debts are defaulted on. America defaults on some of their debts in 1934. This is one of the things that happens. Governments default on debt. But usually when you default on a debt, you then have to agree a payment structure to repay it or reorganize it in a different way. You have to, you either lose, let's put it this way, the money doesn't go away. You don't just go, I don't want to pay that. You have to pay it back in a different way. So when you default, you then restructure your payments. No, that's not what I'm saying. Is you're saying one thing, and you've decided to bring this into the conversation about this. And I'm trying to answer that before I move on. And yeah. So the point is, yes, there is a default, and I'm guessing I know where you've read that one. But the point is, they default because it's after the Great Market Crash, the Great Depression, all that huge crash of the economies, all them going. So lots of people have to restructure their debts, and the debt was still paid off. It's one of the reasons why it lasted. The UK was, up until 1933-ish, on track to repay its World War I debt by about 1950, they reckoned. The thing is, that's one of the reasons why it takes so long till 2000, and I think I saw in the thing 2006, but I was thinking 2005, is because of the restructuring that takes place after 1934. So that's the reason it takes so long. It does get paid back, but it has to be restructured. And also there's the problem that some of the banks that they were actually loans to go bankrupt. The debt gets bought by the American government, then gets sold to different banks, and it gets a lot of fun to track it down of exactly who's being paid. So there is a potential, there is some out there which wasn't paid because of the confusion that happens in about 1934-35 era, when the debt's being moved around. But Quizmaster law, no, restructuring debt isn't the same, but if you default, you then have to restructure. And when you're a government. And that's what happens. When governments default, they then have to restructure. Now, hopefully with that being explained and that getting through, we'll get back on. Now, Hitler is, I would have to say in this scenario, he has been provoked many, many times. You have to put it, there is provocations. There are these things going on. Now, the point is, with all that being said, Hitler hasn't declared war. He hasn't got involved. He hasn't widened it to America. And you have to think about that fact that to an extent he didn't really think it was sensible for him to do it. You have to think there must have been some part in his brain thinking this is not a good idea. This is not a good idea. To actually declare this war, to do this, isn't a good idea. Now, realistically, though, how long does that last for? Does he think the Japanese victories initial victories in the Far East are going to be enough? Or does he calculate Japan will keep America busy long enough that that he will free up his submarines in the North Atlantic to be able to attack the areas which have been under neutrality zone, under the patrol, under the Pan American Security Zone, under those things, to deal with that. Greg, it's not actually... Please note, I hope it wasn't taken as a smackdown. It was more a case of, this is something I hear I've had been chucking at me a lot recently on the internet, and I'm going to make sure I answer it properly, and I'm going to make sure I hopefully know what point you're coming from so I can answer you properly and explain it. Because it's one of those things of, it comes up, and again, you have to go through it and have to explain where it happened. And I know this is backtracking again, but the point is, if the restructuring and things which take place in 1934, which include, I think some of it was written off. Some of it was written off, default as part of default, but also restructured. And most of it was restructured into it. Is one of the reasons why it then does take till 2006, 2005, 2006 to pay it all off. It goes from being, a lot of them is transferred from what is 20-year gilts to 80 and 100-year gilts. Okay? And that's one of the things that happens. Now, that's also, interesting enough, Britain's able to do that. But one of the reasons why Britain has that happen is because Germany defaults on their reparations. And the Germany defaults on their reparations because the American banks can't loan them money. Because this is one of the money circulars, this also that actually does feed into Hitler's declaration of war. Because one of the reasons why Hitler rises to power, one of the issues you have in Germany is they have been depending for a lot of liquidity on American banks and their bank loans to repay the debts of the Treaty of Versailles and the war reparations they're having to pay back to Britain and France. Britain and France were using a lot of their reparations coming from Germany to pay their war loans. Okay, so when the American banks have a crash and can no longer provide further loans to Germany, Germany can no longer repay its treaty obligations, which means, and so on. It's also one of the reasons why the German economy goes through such massive, rapid hyperinflation, where you literally are taking barrels of money to go and pay for a loaf of bread. And even then, by the time you get paid and you've got your barrel of money and racing to the shops to buy it, you might not have enough money to buy a loaf of bread. So, believe it or not, this is another reason why Germany hates America. And by the way, this is the point is when I'm doing the trigger warning thing because I don't want YouTube. I'm doing enough stuff in this video that YouTube's going to demonetize me. Don't want them to be upset with me too badly as well. They blame that on the Jewish bankers who run America. It's the Jewish bankers who did that. It's the Jewish disease, as they put it, which has caused this trouble in America, which has led to this. And it's not. Okay? It's not. It's the fact that there was a rapid, massive bubble of spending. And it was completely based off experience during World War I and the rapid industrialization which comes off that and the rapid economic growth. And that's brilliant. And everything's rocking along. And the world is kind of running hot. And no one wants to put the brake on it. No one wants to, the engine's running great. We're making world record steam. Everything's going spectacular. Why would you put a brake on it? Why would you slow this down? And so when the engine comes off the rails because it tries to go around a corner too fast, no one saw it coming, but everyone saw it coming. Because this is what happens. It's human psychology. When things are going well, we like to let them go well. When things are going badly, they don't. Now, here is the fun thing. All that adds up to things which Hitler blames on America. And it is as said, a 90-minute long tirade. It is a 90-minute long tirade. Oh, great. I've been taught that the American isolation used the lack of full repayment of World War I to justify cash and carry policy. That's all we're saying. That is one of the reasons why they did carry it out. But it was due to the fact that they hadn't repaid by schedule. Remember what I said? They were supposed to be being repaying by 1945, 1950. The loans were supposed to be 20-year loans, and they'd had to be extended to really long loans with really good terms to make them last. So yeah, you are right. That is part of it, but it wasn't because the loans weren't being repaid and wouldn't eventually be repaid by 2006. It's that they hadn't been able to keep to the schedule, and so they pushed through a cash and carry. But actually, what's really interesting is that that's user justification, but also cash and carry kind of suits the British and in the system as well, because it means the British can keep the debt internal to the empire. So the British take the loans from places like Singapore with its sterling zone, from Canada, from Australia, or they sell the stuff to them, so they keep the money within the empire, which actually works better for the British as well. So one of the things is cash and carry works really well for the British on that front. But there are lots of reasons why, but a lot of those reasons have layers and layers below them. And that's the fun bit of history. And that's what adds up to it. MIFO bills did not help get the economy moving. No. MIFO bills were literally just more debt on debt on debt. And so Hitler is thinking of these things all through, but also, I hate to say this, he doesn't seem to realize how big America is. Hitler doesn't do well when it comes to understanding other nations. He really doesn't. He's one of the most naval, when I say naval, I mean naval as in contemplating his own stomach, politicians you have in that era when it comes to foreign policy. He really does believe his own rhetoric, and he believes that because he has punted for various, there's been long shots before and they've worked out for him, he can keep doing it. You can't. You can't keep doing it. And he wanted it to work. He wanted it to work. He wanted to have this success. But it wasn't going to happen. It wasn't going to be a case of America was going to back down. America was going to fail. The classic example is, and Garrus again said this on Wednesday, in both world wars, Germany didn't anticipate how quickly Britain would get involved. I would argue in both world wars, they don't anticipate how quickly Britain will get involved, and they don't anticipate America will actually get involved. Because to them, America is the other side of the world. It's where you go to get away from European issues. So why would you get involved in European issues? And if you're Roosevelt, the answer is quite simple. Because if Hitler somehow ends up getting control of Britain and the Royal Navy, as well as having the German army and the Italian and the German Navy and Italian Navy and the French Navy, etc., under his control, I have a problem. Yes, I can probably win that and possibly win that fight, because there will probably be hundreds of different organizations rising up in rebellion against that kind of control that I can support. But oh good lord, will I have to spend a lot of blood, a lot of treasure, and a lot of people to do that, to actually win that war. So I prefer to try and fight them at a distance. And that's what Roosevelt's been doing. But you can't thread that line without provoking. And he has been provoking. And so Hitler, I think he does make the call that, the phrase comes out, great powers aren't declared war on, they declare war on others. And that's a bit of a joke, because actually you don't do that. You declare war. You declare war when you have to. And also, technically, Germany had been declared war on by Britain and France, which meant that they must be greater powers than Germany, right? By that logic, and I'm sure Hitler wouldn't agree with that. It's a good way of giving himself some praise. I think he's more saying we're declaring war on them before they declare war on us, because we're pushing it already. That's what they're doing. They're basically going, we're declaring war because, frankly, if we don't, we're gonna end up in this fight anyway. We're going to end up in this fight. We're going to end up with this happening to us, whether we want it to or not. So we will do it. And that's what happens to them. That is what happens. They wanted a war. They started a war. They're in a war. He declares war. He lets them. He wants to be the main character. Now, here's the really fun thing, because the power who is most shocked by Germany and Italy declaring war is Japan. Honestly, I don't think Japan really thought they'd do it. I really don't. I think they didn't think they'd do it. I think they didn't think they'd do it. The more I've read about Japan, the more stuff I've read, especially in Kaigen. The more I've read in this book, the more I've read the other books, I honestly don't think Japan thought they'd go through with it. I think Japan thought they would bottle it. I really do. I don't think they expect them to declare war at all. That would also explain why they have such relatively junior ambassadorial representation in Europe at the time. So when they are signing agreements, this can happen. They can just sign the agreements that happen, like the Tripartite Act. They don't have the really big players out there, and the thing is, Japan had actually agreed as late as April 1941 a non-aggression agreement with the Soviet Union. They'd actually agreed that. This is after they had agreed a peace treaty on non-aggression back in 1939, which of course had to be in place before Stalin would invade Poland. Stalin is literally waiting to invade Poland till after he's wrapped up the war in Siberia with the Japanese. So, yeah. Thanks, Mr. Clarke. Thank you. Yeah, but I think the Anglo-American loan agreement from memory does take in a lot of other agreements as well. It's fun, but because that's also something that happens, is that some of the debt gets subsumed into World War II. And, yeah, there's a lot of fun debt agreements between America and Britain in that period. What's really funny is there's also a loan agreement between America for that America owes money to Britain. That would be an entire video, and I'd want to get an economic historian on for that one, because they can talk in the phraseology which actually is the correct economic phraseology, rather than just saying, this is paid off, right? This is the details, and this is what happens. The pit rules. As an American who hates AFDR, Mussolini wasn't that far off. Also, I totally agree it was fear of missing out on his part. Yeah. Mussolini has king of FOMO. He's the guy who literally invades France, declares war on the Allies, joins the war in June 1940. Literally because he's afraid that he's going to miss out on the peace deal. Yeah, no. America and Britain always seem to find a way to extend their loans. We'll leave that to one side. They're fun. They like to have debt with each other. Yeah, the Anglo-American loan wasn't 1946. Wasn't the World War II debt. That was the consolidation of other debt for post-World War II and some of the pre-World War II debt. Believe it or not. It is a consolidation. And then there's the whole various plans that come after us. But that's a whole economic video, and I'm getting an economic historian on for that one. I have a friend who has done an entire PhD in this topic area, so I'll see if she's free, and I'll try and get her onto the two historians before the Christmas period is over. If you want to put questions, the question bot is open and running, by the way. I should put this up, and then people know that the question bot is running. And so questions go into the question bot, and I'll answer them at the end. Now, this is another reason why, because Japan has agreements, because they can't take part in invasion and war against the Soviet Union, all this thing, they're having this fight. They're having this, this internal. They think that because they couldn't get hold of the Soviet, they don't see why the Germans and Italians are joining them. They are fighting in the Far East. There is no way they can share logistics. There is no way they can realistically support each other. There is no way they can be of actual functional cooperative power with each other. And Ola Greg, you should ask questions. It's fun to chat away and but with all this going on, the Japanese literally honestly look at them going, "Why have you done this?" So that's the really fun thing. Okay, technically, while the Allies are at war, for a long period, the Japanese and Soviets aren't fighting each other and technically in normal diplomatic relations with each other, whilst the Americans, the British, and the Americans, the British Empire, all the free powers, etc., and are fighting the Germans and the Italians and the Japanese. The Soviets aren't fighting the Japanese. And whilst the Italians and Germans are fighting everyone, the Japanese aren't fighting the Soviets. So there are two powers, one technically on the Allied side, one on the Axis side, who are not technically at war for most of the war. Now, one could argue that if the Japanese had been less honourable, they could have been more helpful to the Germans. Because here's the thing. Imagine if the Japanese had held their forces back, hadn't engaged in earlier conflicts, and had invaded the Soviet Union at the same time as the Germans did, pushing them into a two-front war. Imagine if they'd done that and joined the war then. That could have been coordinated. That could have been helpful. That could probably have still led to the Japanese being defeated on the ground, because let's be honest, the ground war versus the Soviets was not something the IJA were particularly capable of. Let's be honest, they've gone after the northern resource area rather than the southern resource area. There is an honest scenario you could have ended up with the Japanese, the Germans, and the Italians fighting the Soviets. The British fighting the Germans and the Italians and aiding the Soviets but not fighting the Japanese. And the Japanese not fighting the Brits. You could have ended up with that scenario. You could have ended up with that. But they didn't. They decided to go for the southern resource area, which they felt their navy could help them secure. They went for various island chains, which they felt would allow them to defend them using air power. By the way, if anyone's seen the recent Chinese plans that they keep talking about of various island bases which they're going to secure with secure airfields on to help them secure control of areas of the Pacific, yes, they are ripping straight out of the Japanese doctrine. Yes, it is as weak as the original Japanese doctrine. Yes, it is as strong as the original Japanese doctrine. And yes, it's going to depend on just how much air power and just how much naval power they have to actually enforce and support it, whether or not it works. As they did with the Japanese system. The Japanese found themselves facing the US Navy and the might of various other powers combined in, and that, frankly, caused them trouble. They weren't designed to take on that much force. Also, the Japanese were planning for a shortish war where they attrited to the opponent's forces, not a longish war where they themselves were attrited, because they didn't have the infrastructure or industrial centre to be able to organise the previous war. Again, looks exactly like the Japanese ones, including the artificial islands. Yeah, it does. But yeah, Japan was not expecting them to declare war. They really weren't. Shameless book plug time. So you all know what happens after this. We're going into alternate history after this point. So yeah, this is where I like to say thank you for liking, sharing, subscribing, helping the channel grow, all those things. And also where I'm going to quickly answer some of the questions and just see a couple about 5 of the questions quickly before we get into that bit. Also, it's usually a point at which I give a bit of time for people if they wish to go get, I know some people like to, use the shameless book plug. I have actually been told by people, they wait for the shameless book plug and then they go grab some food or a drink quickly from the kitchen. I love that they are dedicated enough that they don't want to go while I'm talking, but about the main stuff. But I do feel a bit guilty sometimes if I take too long. It is the Bruce's questions. Minimize that down to there. I have no idea what that is. Thesis is even the gift things. Thank you. Knight. Wasn't Germany and Italy going to war with America inevitable? I don't think any war is ever inevitable, but there is a high likelihood of it. I don't like to believe any war is ever inevitable, mainly because we've stopped so many wars with deterrence and various prevention methods. You don't need to. Does your desk chair have wheels, and does Riley like the tug of war? Yes, it does have wheels. Raleigh doesn't tend to do tug of war. He does pushing the chair. He jumps up and pushes the chair. He doesn't tug of war. He just pushes the chair. Have you read Lowney's book on John Buchanan and Forts? If it was one I think it is, yes, a while ago. And it was okay, I think, from memory, if it's the one I'm thinking of. Send me details and I'll have a look and see if it's in the collection. And Thomas Belden, how do things change if the war starts with Pearl Harbor, let's say due to a more aggressive UK keeping Hitler and Italy in line? Basically, if France and Britain have been more capable of keeping Italy and Germany in line with deterrence and being more assertive, then also you have the problem that if the war could start in the Far East, then you have more forces able to be deployed. But also, if the war has held off for that long, Britain and France will be that much further along in their rearmament programs, and that's going to cause Germany and Italy a lot of trouble. Because by that point, the French might actually have given their soldiers working radios. You never know. And that could change all sorts of things. Derp Squad, the US and Germany were already de facto in open conflict. Once the US declares war on Japan, any justification needed for the US to make it de jure against Germany and Italy wouldn't be hard. Yeah, there is that reality. But again, it's far more difficult for Roosevelt to declare war. A democracy, it's always far more difficult for a democracy to declare war than it is for an authoritarian government. If you declare, think about this, if Roosevelt wants to declare war on Germany and Italy, he has to get it through Congress, he has to get it through the Senate, he has to get, he has to get all sorts of people on side. Congress, of course, is the Senate and the House of Representatives. So yeah, he has to get it through both houses. Sorry, I don't know why I said Congress and Senate rather than House of Representatives and Senate, but we'll leave it to one side. He has to get it through all the levels. If war is declared on him, then it's easy. So the thing is, you actually the Germans and the Italians both neuter any of their allies in America, their political allies in America, their ability to stall, and they neuter all the opposition voices by doing this. If they'd done this, if they hadn't done it, if they hadn't declared war, it could have been months, years before America could get openly involved in the war. So you think about it, all the air forces that wouldn't arrive in the UK, all the bomber forces, all those forces that come across to Europe, there would have been no Europe first strategy, it would have been a Pacific first strategy. All sorts of things don't happen if America can't join the war and can't start fighting in that sort of scenario. So I would say it was very silly on their part, because yeah, they could have quite easily given themselves months more time by making the Americans work through the various diplomatic processes. Thank you, Verdun, for the thing. I'm glad you enjoyed Wednesday video. I'm hoping a lot of people enjoy what will hopefully be next Wednesday's video, but I'll be recording it, so that's why I won't be on Discord this evening, because I'm going to be recording it this evening. And I'll get to the rest of the questions at the end. Let's start off with, so what happens if one or both don't declare war? Okay, John Galbraith is a guy who was involved in the U.S. in the U.S. governments in this period, and he's often people use the picture of him from when he was older, not the picture of him from around the time. I used the picture from around the time. He's an economist who also gets involved in international relations, all sorts of fun things. And basically, he's enough close to the Roosevelt government that he goes, it would have been shenanigans up the shenanigans. Now, the thing is, those shenanigans are going to be complicated. Well, the point is, Derp Squad, and this is the point I'd like to make. And I know you've already put it in, there are going to be German submarines shooting torpedoes. There have already been German submarines sunk by American destroyers enforcing the neutrality patrols and the Pan America zone. There have already been incidents where shots have been fired at each other well before this declaration of war. It's happened 3 or 4 times. So that ain't worked. That has not worked. I think actually with Karl von Gersberg, I can actually work out where they're coming from. Basically, they don't declare war on Germany, but, the Americans just keep expanding. I'm presuming that basic question is, it should probably be replaced as, do the Americans just keep expanding the Pan America Zone neutrality patrols further and further across the Atlantic, even while fighting the war with Japan? That's the trouble is, though, and here's the real thing. They could do that, but while they were doing that, they were sacrificing forces that they didn't have in the Pacific. So to do those patrols in the Atlantic, they didn't have those forces in the Pacific, which is one of the reasons why they're short of destroyers, one of the reasons why they're short of forces in the Pacific when war begins. Now, the thing is, if you've got a war going on, it's very hard for you to justify putting a lot of ships into the Atlantic in a peacekeeping force. Remember, one of the things that happens during the Falklands War, in 1982, there are classic examples of this. What do a lot of the Commonwealth do for Britain during the war? Well, there are a lot of patrols we're doing, international patrols and various positions where we maintain the peace and the presence. And they slip their ships into those patrols while we pull our ships back for other operations. Some ships are pulled back to the UK to be armed up and turned into a full war footing. Some are pulled back. Some are sent into the task group, etc. Task groups going down south and all those things. And in return, Allies step in. That's what happens in that scenario, and that's how they help out. But yeah, you had to withdraw forces because you were fighting a war. And again, the Americans would have to withdraw forces from the Pan America Zone, from the neutrality patrols, from the Atlantic sphere operations to support the Pacific operations. Because whilst when you've got two theatres of war, which one you're giving emphasis is up to debate. If you've got a theatre of war you're actually fighting in, and a theatre of war you're not ostensibly involved in, you're not actually a participant in, it's a very easy win which gets your priorities in it. It's the reality of the world. Now, that being said, what happens if both don't? Nothing much, really. As far as the Pacific War is concerned. If Germany and Italy don't declare war on America, then America and everyone is focusing on America's focusing on the Pacific. Germany and Italy are still fighting in the Soviet Union. There's no information going backwards and forwards between the two. They probably still have a friendly agreements going on, information going backwards and forwards too, but they're not involved in the war. And this means the war isn't really united. You have two wars. You have a European war going on, which has interesting bits going on in North Africa and the Mediterranean and North Atlantic. So, you know, you can call that what you want to do. But the major participants all come from Europe, so it'd probably be just called a European war. And you've got a Pacific War. Now, the thing is, you're still putting the same pressure on Britain and the same pressure on everyone else. But you're not putting the same pressure on America as well, because they can decide what they do. As I said, they have to decide what they're going to do. Now, I think if both don't declare war, it's probably okay that their agreement probably still works out. But I think for America, there's going to be issues. Now, the thing is, up until this point, none of their destroyers have been sunk, but they have been sinking German submarines. With the results going on, and the options still going on, if Japan attacked Britain, and they will probably be attacking Britain still, because that's still part of their war plan, if they go for Britain, then that could lead to an option. Because you see, Britain declares war on Japan to back up America. They do that. With that being said, so Britain and America are now fighting both a war against Japan. The moment they fought, one of the methods Roosevelt could use is he could form an alliance for the war. And that alliance could be until the current period of strife for authoritarian powers is over. And basically do like the Soviet Union does. And we'll fight the war versus Japan first. Once we've beaten them, then we'll come fight the war against Germany and Italy. Alternatively, they have an agreement where they basically split the theatres in two. Kind of like they do historically, but even more so. Britain doesn't send anything to the Pacific at all. No T-class boats operating out of Australia, nothing at all. They concentrate entirely on Southeast Asia to an extent, and those sort of areas. Sorry. Rain is falling massively outside, and it might affect the satellite link. Shouldn't do, but it might do. Just a heads up. Now, that's an option. The final option is this. And I do say it's this. Is that there's an accident. And let's say something more important than a destroyer gets hit by a German torpedo. Something more important than a destroyer gets hit by a German torpedo. That could have an impact. But realistically, this is a very unlikely scenario where both don't declare war. It is a really, really unlikely scenario. It is not the most unlikely scenario that we are going to look at, but it is a really unlikely scenario. Say an ocean liner, perhaps a Lusitania 2.0, perhaps a battle ship or something. Yeah, you have to remember, destroyers of this period, and I do try and make a point out, I think, kind of, well, if you consider the amount of destroyers most navies did in themselves through exercises during peacetime, with crashing into things, destroyers were to an extent expendable enough that they weren't going to start a war over them. And there are many deals which could be had, and Euler Green, and yeah, the great Euler Greg, it's Euler Greg, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah, that you've literally come with a straight one which I can answer here because it's part of the topic. If Britain and America are not technically but you know, Britain's fighting Japan, but America fighting Japan, but America's not fighting Germany, then America can dress up any aid to Britain as being helping them fighting the war against Japan. So literally, America can go, we're not giving this aid to Britain to fight Germany and Italy, we're giving it to aid them to fight the war against Japan. So yeah, have another 50 destroyers, have escort carriers, have these merchant ships, etc., all these things. They can do it in the nicest way. It's actually almost the worst scenario for Germany, because Roosevelt can play it, so Britain and the Allies have pretty much a de facto blank check. But Germany can't do anything to Britain and do anything to America, and that's a bad situation for them. You see, under the threat where they declare war, they can actually start attacking American ports. They can go in to do it as well. If the neutral zone is still declared, and so Britain is able to buy merchant ships and warships and other things from America with impunity, and organise them, get them up to Halifax with impunity, and only has to fight them from Halifax across the world after they've organised into a convoy, and only have to that's made their job a lot easier. A lot easier. So, honestly, both not declaring war, That's because destroyers today, as I've said before, are basically cruisers. As are frigates. All escorts today, modern escorts, are pretty much cruisers. They look at their peacetime mission role, look at the traditional mission role, the cruising role. That's what they do. They are all cruisers. They're all cruisers, okay? It's just frigates are ASW cruisers, destroyers are air defense cruisers, and who knows what we call the general purpose cruisers. Battle cruisers, probably. Andy, you're both right and wrong. In the nicest way, America made a good deal. That's it. Nations don't have friendships, they have interests. Good allies are nations which share interests. It doesn't mean you get stuff for free, because they're always going to look after their interests first. So in the nicest way, if you're doing it, it's like going into let me explain this, but there's another way. When you are, let's say, buying something from a salesman, a good salesman is trying to find out what you need so they can deliver it, so you will become a repeat customer and so they can get a sale and a lot more sales from you. Are they still seeking to make a profit? Yes. Are they still acting in their own interest? Yes. But they're also going to take your interests into account. Doesn't make them a bad person, it makes them good at their job. A nation which is being your friend, but is not expecting anything in return, is probably going to be rare. So a nation which is going, okay, we want to do this, we want to get good results, Roosevelt's got to go back to his own Senate and to his own country and go, I've got a good deal. I gave them 50 destroyers, I got some bases. I gave them this, I got this out of it. That's the way it is. And Lend-Lease goes both ways. That's one of the fun things about Lend-Lease. The amount of people who forget Lend-Lease goes the other way, and America actually gets stuff off the UK. Flag-class corvettes are a good thing, okay? Go and look them up. I've got a book. I'm going to soon get out on them, I promise. Soon. As soon as I get some time to be happy with the final edit. And don't keep getting interrupted by builders going, do you have your checkbook handy? And we charge the Soviets. Andy, we made the Soviets pay as well. Oh, we didn't give them our stuff for free. Oh, good lord, no. And the Soviets charged for the aid they gave us, because remember, there's a lot of raw materials and things which the Soviet Union gives to us as well. So yeah. Yeah, I know. Trust me, you see some of the television programs about the British and America in World War II and the aid to the Soviets, and they go, "Yeah, we gave them this." No one remembers the fact there was people going, "And you're paying? This will be on loan." Yeah. Trust me, the Vickers salesmen do not supply tanks for free. Hence all the lot of gold lost on HMS Edinburgh. Yes, exactly. HMS Edinburgh was carrying back gold, which was going to pay the bills. The British literally sent a cruiser to get the gold. And they're not just one cruiser, they sent multiple cruisers to pick up the Soviet gold, to pay the bills. Quite literally some gunboat diplomacy going on there. Yeah. So, here's the fun thing for all of us to think about. What happens if Italy doesn't join the war? If they don't declare war? Now, I think the only physical way you're going to stop Fanboy Funboy, the less improved Italian edition of World War II, aka Mussolini. As we all know, the original Fatboy Funboy is Henry VIII. He shall forever be known as Fatboy Funboy I. But Fatboy Funboy 2, the Italian edition, and this Fatboy Funboy, the German edition from World War II. The Fatboy Funboy from the German edition from World War II is, of course, the redoubtable Hermann Goering. who spends most of his war snorting, drinking, or licorishing his way through World War II. Please note the order I put these things through. And then Fat Boy Fun Boy, the Italian edition, is Mussolini. Yeah. Fun times. So, if Italy doesn't declare war on America, what happens? Well, the only reason I see it happening is if Mussolini falls from power. And the thing is, there are so many senior people in Italy at this point who are already against him, who are already sure they're going to lose the war, who are already sure that the moment declaring war in America and Britain, we might be able to win against Britain, but we're currently losing in North Africa and various other things at this point. And we've had all sorts of disasters happen. Remember, this is after Taranto. This is after a lot of events which have really built up on them. They've had some victories, but not enough to offset the losses. And that there are quite a few who are trying to get rid of him. And they almost do use the whole declaration of war in the United States as a way to get rid of him. Andy, I did read Goring was addicted to oxycodone and went a bit mental. He was, in the nicest way, the easier list to give you about Goring, about his drug use, is the list of what he wasn't addicted to and didn't take. It's smaller, will take less time for us to discuss, and probably won't introduce people to anything new. But let me put it this way. Goring was one of the people who really liked to experiment with how, not just what drugs you take, but how you take them, and where they're inserted into your anatomy, in the full plethora of times. There is an entire book about the various exegesis of the National Socialist Party's leadership during World War II, and it makes for mildly disturbing reading. So, now the thing is, as I've mentioned before, December 1941, Operation Crusader is in full swing. Yes, Rommel is planning his great counterattack and all sorts of things are happening along, but imagine this. Tobruk is about to be, relieved, all sorts of things are about to happen, and Italy erupts into neutrality. They suddenly start negotiating peace. There's not the garrison of forces in Italy. There's not the troops in Italy. There's not the troops positioned to go into Italy that there are later on in 1943 for German side. There's nothing to preserve Mussolini's position. Italy's in a very different position in 1941 than they will be in 1943. They have been in the war for a little over 18 months in December 1941. A little under this 18 months, actually, in December 1941. So imagine if they suddenly go, Mussolini's kicked from power, and the new government goes, we're going neutral, we're getting out of this war. That's right. Do you have a title of that book? I have it. I have it all stored somewhere, but I will look it up for you. It was not many copies were published. It was it was one of those history books which was kind of definitely not not PG 13 that not many shops wanted it. So I think it's basically only able to be found on Amazon by people doing it by remote online sale. But you can. I think it's still around. It was an interesting read. It was published in the 1960s, and it's an interesting read. I know because the professors I studied under, the two of the professors I studied under at university had copies. France has fallen. France has fallen a while back. But the thing is, at this point, it's Vichy France, Germany, these things. But if Mussolini falls, There is the very real scenario that if the Italian forces in North Africa stop fighting the British, at which point, without also the Regia Marina to do the resupply and the Regia Aeronautica supporting operations, the Africa Corps' days are numbered. There is no chance of Rommel fighting back. Italy dropping out the war in 1941 changes World War II dramatically. There is also a possibility that, of course, you end up with your second front in Europe because Germany then decides to try and invade Italy, and you end up with mountain warfare going on again in northern Italy. You do remember there are Italian contingents with the invasion of the Soviet Union, but yes, there are some troops, but they have other troops back in Italy. They also have quite a large number of forces in North Africa, and the British will probably gladly help them get them back to Italy to help them operating in Italy and to defend Italy. And the British will probably gladly also deal with the Africa Corps and make sure they're all prisoners for them. Let's be honest, for Britain, that's a win-win-win. You know, and nicest way, I'm fairly certain Britain would bend over backwards, sideways, and do a full contortion on those funny mats which people do that sort of thing on. Oh, what is it? Where they're stretching round like everything around people. I cannot remember for the life of me. Anyway, they would go full contortionist to make sure Italy could get their troops back from North Africa to Italy to fight that battle and defend themselves. And also pulls troops out of garrisoning France. And yeah, it's going to cause trouble for the Germans. Italy withdrawing from the war causes issue. Yeah, is it yoga? I don't think it's yoga. Twister, that's it, Malaga. Thank you, Twister. Yeah, Twister. Basically, British will be prepared to go full Twister to help the Italians in that scenario. And yeah, what it does also is it changes the scenario quite dramatically for a lot of World War II. In that, again, the 11th of December is 10th of December is when the Japanese sink the Prince of Wales and repulse. That is a factor in this decision-making process. That is a factor in this. But if on the 11th of December then Germany and Italy split up and suddenly the Royal Navy has the Mediterranean fleet freed, then let's imagine what happens in the Far East. What kind of force turns up? Because if you don't have to deal with the Regia Marina, if the Regia Marina are no longer your opponents in the Mediterranean, think about all the forces and assets which are in the Mediterranean fleet, for example, which won't need to be there. It gets even better if the Germans do actually attack Italy over this, because A, they end up fighting on another front, B, and it's in Europe, and you can reinforce it. So there's no invasion of Sicily, there's no invasion of North Africa, there's no invasion of Italy. None of those things have to happen. You're reinforcing through Italy if you want to get troops in there, into it. And you possibly do an invasion of France from Italy and go up that direction if you really want to. But more importantly, you also have the Regia Marina to provide extra ships which you can use for various things if they become your ally, and you can you can use the Mediterranean to resupply your forces in the Far East. You can put enough ASW forces at the various points in the Mediterranean, along with convoying. You basically don't have to worry about the submarine threat will be contained. In fact, it will have no impact on your ability to resupply. Once you get your ships past Gibraltar, they will no longer have to worry. They will the threat of German submarines will be down so low that it will have no effect on the sailings. So it has a massive impact on World War II if Germany drops out in 1941.
Andy, Pilates, are they the guys obsessed with rum? Oh, I love that one. I'm going to use that one. I am going to use that one. But yeah, it would be very much a, you know, a very far heavier force. It would also not be all dependent upon Somerville. So an Indian Ocean fleet would not be entirely Somerville led. It would be probably Somerville and Cunningham at this point. Also think about it, how it changes the balance of forces. Suddenly Britain can commit far more naval forces, at least to the Far East, but also land forces. Think about what can quickly be got onto ships. Let's think about this again. Think about how many troops could be quickly loaded onto ships in the Suez zone and transported from Suez to the Far East. Now, Singapore falls in February 1942. You could probably have reinforced it and got better generals out to Malaya well before then. Let's think about what happens if the desert rats with their full armor show up in the Malaya. Now, admittedly, the jungle isn't perfect for armored warfare, but the desert rats are pretty much an A-grade unit for the British Armed Forces, and they can pretty much smash pretty much anything the Japanese have in that area, because as the Soviets have shown, the Japanese versus armor in any kind of scenario where they're having to fight maneuver against them is not good for them. And that just starts to make things very different. So yes, Italy not deciding not to declare war, and probably because, as said, the Fat Boy Fun Boy, the Italian edition, misses out because of the fear of missing out means he would do it, but someone gets rid of him. Changes things quite dramatically, and it is probably the most likely of these alternate histories. And almost certainly shortens World War II. Castanet and Matilda's probably doing much. Let's be honest, the Australians and New Zealanders, Australians definitely, I think New Zealanders as well, were using Matildas in the Jungle War throughout World War II against the Japanese very successfully. Matildas were actually very good at it because they were very easy to maintain and keep going. So yeah, they were pretty darn useful throughout World War II. Look, I know, and I can already get it's going to come up the moment we bring this up, but yes, MacArthur dealing. The thing is, in this scenario, Roosevelt does get his wish, and MacArthur is definitely not in charge of Southeast Asia. Or South, that doesn't get this. Basically, the commands are probably split as the Americans get one command, the British get another command, and that's how the war progresses. And they get the two theatres. But it's going to be interesting and fun. Take care, Articadet. Anyway. So, to be fair, we do have to discuss the other theoretical. Theoretically, this is the least likely of these alternate scenarios. This is the one which is so unlikely to be the case, there is virtually no chance Mr. Ego doesn't declare war, okay? So Mussolini declares war on Italy. Mussolini declares war on America, which pretty much is declaring war on Italy at this point. But Germany doesn't. Let's just bear that in mind for a second, what that could lead to. Let's just all think about the scenario of this, where Roosevelt's sitting there going, Mussolini's declared war, right? Yes. And we're all with Japan? Yes, they attacked us. And Hitler has refused to declare war. Now, he's probably counting the days until Hitler does declare war, because let's be honest, but, you know, yeah, this is the scenario. In this scenario, Hitler goes, no, I'm giving them a pass. I'm giving them a pass. Look. It is a possibility, so we have to discuss it. And it would be basically Hitler going, okay, there's no point. We can't fight them. There's no point. We cannot fight. We cannot add America. We've got Russia. We've got all these issues going on. We don't need to add America to this mix as an enemy we actually have to fight. But if Italy does do this, then suddenly America can send forces to North Africa to fight the Italians in the Mediterranean, and but they cannot really send forces to Britain to fight the Germans. The Americans can help convoy stuff across the Atlantic. As said, that's usually, and I've said this before, I'll say this again, there are points in World War II where the US Navy is very short of destroyers, and so they focus their destroyers on the Pacific. And during these periods, usually, you will find that the US Navy is not the leading power, doesn't have as many ships in the convoys and the North Atlantic as you'd expect it to. Usually those periods, I've described this sometimes, it isn't the USN's focus. In those periods, you will occasionally find that the Royal Canadian Navy outnumbers them. You will find, sometimes in those periods, the US Coast Guard has more vessels taking part in convoys than the US Navy. There is nothing wrong with that. This is the reality of you only have a finite number of ships, and you have to prioritize where they're going to go, because a third of those ships are going to be in maintenance. A third of those ships are going to be traveling to and from places, or training, or doing all the things. Only a third of those ships are going to be available for operations. And that's before you start dealing with ships which are casualties, which have been damaged by enemy action, which have, sunk or lost, and all those things. It all adds up and all causes a cumulative effect. This war is logistic. A war, especially a long war, is about logistics and cumulative impact. So if Germany doesn't declare war, it actually means that the Americans pretty much are in the full war, but they're going to take over leading the bombing of Italy, because the British will just go, we can lead that to you, can't we? If you want to commit any bombing forces to Europe, and we'll just concentrate on bombing Germany. And yeah. The reality is, though, the moment you get Americans involved in North Africa, there is going to end up being a fight. Because the Americans end up in North Africa, and this is how it probably happens. So the British are fighting the Italians, the British are fighting the Japanese, the Americans are fighting the Italians, the Americans are fighting the Japanese. The Americans end up in North Africa, and they're fighting the Italians, and the Italians and Germans are co-located, and they end up bombing them, or there actually ends up being a fight somewhere in North Africa against them, and that's how you end up with war on that side. But this is the scenario which will cause the most trouble. It will probably end up with a war being fought between America and Germany, but it will not be a nice declaration of war. It will be a messy fight. It will be an absolute blunderbuss of a scenario. People talked about, torpedoes. It won't be a destroyer. It won't be something torpedoed in the Atlantic. No. In this scenario, it would be something in North Africa. It would be. It would be, because that's also, if you think about it, the easiest way to cause it to be cause it to be visible. You could have a lot of reporters there. You could have let's say American troops who are, visiting, who are in North Africa visiting a British artillery position, and they get shelled by the Germans or something like that. Yeah, it's as Matthew Guinness put it. It is the 100% war star dates, and Verdun's all said this. Basically, if you have the two in there, two forces in there, and they're not supposed to be fighting each other, that's going to start a war. Also, because, and this is the point I'll put in my own. Who's in charge of the German forces in North Africa? Rommel. Mr. Logistics happens to other people. Mr. I have a great plan for how to use infantry, but I'm going to run an armored unit. Mr. There are good points and bad points against Rommel, there really are, and I do recommend reading his infantry tactics book. It's a really good way to understand World War One. Really good way to understand World War One and some of the operations in World War One. And also, just remember that a lot of the ideas and tactics which he's talking about at the end of the book from World War One were what the British and the Allies were doing to Germany at the end of World War One. That means that he is very likely to do something silly. Like think, well, if the Americans aren't supposed to fight the Germans, then what I can do is I can charge my forces at the Americans, they'll have to back out the way and let us through, and then I can attack the British. And everyone, especially the Americans in the chat, I'd just like to point out, if you had a load of German forces charging at you, would you, even if you weren't at war with them, retreat and let them through, or would you hold your ground? What would you do? I know what I think the Americans would do, and I could see this happening, but I'd like to hear what people in the chat believe the Americans would do in that scenario. What do you think the American troops would do in that scenario? Especially as we can imagine the troops there are probably will be US Army, because the Marines will be in the Pacific again. They're going to be fairly solid troops. They're going to be ones who served in the 30s, and quite a lot of officers in NTOs, and some are going to serve in World War One against the fought against the Germans. A fair number of their senior officer cases. But I'm interested to see what the chat says. I'm interested to see what's in the chat. Okay. Sorry, now the fact is that there is comments turning up in the various parts of my channel now going, tomato is a fruit and that's on pizza, but pineapple is a bit too exotic to go on pizza, My feeling, the putting a US Army in danger of a direct attack usually creates a lethal response, yeah. I think this is the point. I think the Americans would fight back. And I think that would be the start of the war. And there'd be a reporter with them who'd be basically, the Germans were storming towards us, expecting us to surrender, us to retreat and withdraw, and we held our ground. And there's a small chance it works once from Malaga if they're facing the right commanding officer, but if they're not, they won't work once. More brothers, how did Germany avoid war after sinking US River James? A lot of diplomacy. A lot of very quick and smart diplomacy. There are variations on that joke, Verdan, but the one I do prefer is your response of that. If you fire on the British will fire well-aimed rifle shots and a Bren machine gun. The Germans, it's a machine gun. The Americans, 10 minutes later, the hill explodes. Yeah. But to be fair, I would like to point out that usually in those scenarios, pretty much everyone a few minutes later, the hill explodes. All of them. Let me put it this way: the artillery is the universal king of the battlefield. It has been for many, many years, and will continue to be so. Even drones have added to it more than have detracted from it. This is one of the fun things when it comes in, and yeah, I would say. Most warfare these days is calling in artillery strikes. Roman, I've seen tourists nearly arrested for asking for Hawaiian pizza in a rural Italian pizzeria. Do not, okay? If you're in don't ask for a Hawaiian pizza in rural Italy. Oh, please don't. Please don't. Take it from a guy who once dated a girl who was half Italian, half Icelandic. And the Italian half was Venetian. Do not. And also, and I cannot stress this enough, do not ask for the wrong sauce or the wrong pasta. Okay? Pastas come with certain sauces in Italy. The pasta type and the sauce are connected. Which pastas go with which sauces? Asking to change that is a good way to get yourself into trouble with the restaurant. I don't mind if you only like one type of pasta and you don't like the sauce they're serving in. Don't ask for the sauce with a different pasta. Have something else. I stress this. Walter Drippers, what if the Russo-Japanese War escalated with Germany and Britain joining in? Russia is in trouble, because those two will join in on the Japanese side. Right, the British fire to keep you on said hill, yes. Paul Mayos didn't know that. Not that I'll be going to Italy. Yeah, yeah. Trust me. I had a fun experience. I luckily had ordered the correct, without realizing it, I'd ordered the correct meal at an Italian restaurant, which we were at in London, and I was meeting with the family. First time, and I got to witness her mum, who is also a professional baker and loves baking things, doing a good 10-minute upset with the menu items, because there was the wrong type of pasta with the wrong sauce, and actually the chef came out and commiserated with her over it and said, yeah, he knows it's not the proper way, but it's the way the locals demand it, so he has to do it. But he knows it's not proper Italian, and he was Italian, and rather than passionately arguing over it, by the end they were passionately agreeing the British had terrible taste in pasta and sauce, and I was just sitting there going, "My meal's nice. I am going to keep very quiet here." Very, very quiet. With that being said, I'm going to move to a different picture for what I'm going to do now, because I'm now going to open up the questions. And, yeah. Let's chat away. British food is actually quite good. I'd like to point out I'm quite well travelled, and I think one of the troubles is that a lot of people look at British food and they go to London, and they go by London food. And I will be the first to tell you that London is not the hub of British cuisine. It really isn't. London is the hub of tourist British cuisine and some very interesting places, which frankly I'm not that keen on. There are some good food places in London. It's just they are overwhelmingly limited by the fact there are a lot more which are places which are designed as tourist traps. Yorkshire pudding, a good British roast is very... If you come to the UK, if you want a good advice, if you want to come to the UK and find some which is quite going to be food and give you a good example of British food, go for a Toby Carvery. Find a Toby Carvery. There are some very good pie shops as well, pie places as well. There are some good restaurants, but if you want a good chain pub to go to, Toby Carvery is hard to beat and is lovely. And basically, it's an all-day roast. They do a breakfast, which is an all-you-can-eat breakfast buffet. They do an all-you-can. The roast is just lovely. It's a good food. It's great Cornish food, great Scottish food. I will say this: in Cornwall, not all pasty shops are the same. There are some very good ones. There are some ones which are really not so great ones. But it's life. Carl. According to the joke, Albania was in the state of war with the USA to the 1960s because their war declaration was gone. Can it be true? Yes. In fact, I think the Isle of Man was in the state of war with Russia till not that. Yeah. When was peace signed? When was peace agreed between? When was? Oh yeah, the war between Berwick-upon-Tweed and Russia was only officially ended in 1966, because they'd started being part of the Britain, Ireland, Berwick-upon-Tweed, and the British Dominions had been part of the joint declaration of war on Russia in 1953 for the Crimean War, but that wasn't ended till 1966 because, well, they managed to sort out the issue of Berwick-upon-Tweed, so they didn't it became legally, it was legally sorted out, so they didn't need to have it as a separate agreement by the time there was the peace treaty. Yay, fun times. The fact that this happens so often that we actually have a name for it called continuance conflicts, yeah, should worry us all. The fact that there is so many continuance conflicts. Thank you. Eels has not been my favourite. I've tried it a couple of times. I never really liked eel. It's just not my food. I think eels used to be nicer. I do, because my granddad used to say this when he was younger. Eels tasted nice. By the time today, no, jellied eels, he'd never liked them. Let's hear on how much does Hitler's worldview affect his decision to go with the USA? Heavily. He doesn't really consult other people. This is one thing that does come through. Neither Hitler nor Mussolini really consult with a lot of people about their decision to go to war in America. And this is probably why they managed to actually, well, in the case of Mussolini, why he managed to do it. I think if Mussolini had consulted more widely, there would be more people hearing people's demurring in meetings, and they would have known there was wider support for not going to war. And that's an interesting thing, because I really do think if Mussolini had done more consulting, there increases the likelihood of Mussolini being toppled from power and dropping out of war. Leslie, I have to say this. One of the things I would love to do is, and this is going to sound slightly strange, is I would love to get the Shipshape crew to do a eating challenge with beard meets food. Because I think it's important that all the British broadcasters who all have quite impressive beards on YouTube get together and do something fun to show that the British beards are prominent in the world and are taking over. And I feel that, a Yorkshire pudding challenge sounds really nice. All 3 courses served in a Yorkshire pudding. Oh, that could be fun. Anyway. So yeah, it is their worldview. It is their worldview. It can never not be their worldview. Stucker, would the US be less involved in World War II if Japanese did not attack them? Well, they wouldn't be involved by end of 1941. I don't see how long the state of not conflict can carry on between Germany and America. I think it eventually does boil over. But I think it might not be. It might be 1942-ish, 1943-ish before they get that. So sadly, I don't have the connections on that front with beer meets food. I keep hoping to get connections. He's one of the people on YouTube who I would really like to meet, and really like to really like to chat to, because it seems quite fun. Excuse me, in nicest way, channel. I am a mere whippersnapper compared to the fat boys of Mussolini, Goering, and Henry VIII. I am nowhere near heavy enough to meet that category of fat boy, fun boy. Now, yeah, but the US involvement in World War II is not entirely based on Japan, but it is heavily helped by Japan. Castanea, how far would Japan have gotten into Siberia before they outrun their supply lines? I don't think they'd have got into Siberia. Honestly, their experiences of war with the Soviet Union had not been good. But it was one of the reasons why the Soviets had most of their best troops in Siberia and in their eastern territories, was because of the Japanese and because of their frequent conflict with them. Calm Gasman, how the UK reasoned not declaring war on Argentina in 1982 but proceeded with military action? As I explained, I think that's basically what you were talking about earlier, was, continuing on with the not a war but it's a conflict scenario. Yeah, the whole not declaring war is an interesting one in 1982, and frankly, I know why they did it, but I think they should have declared war. I think that would have made things a lot easier. But they were trying to be smart. And they were trying to do it in such a way that it didn't enable people to get involved, so they didn't want to get involved in the conflict. The fact that, Leslie, the fact that you've told me now that entire... Okay, so this is the Yorkshire pudding meal that's in that pub, which Leslie was talking about earlier. The Crooked Billet Inn near Towton. Starter. Homemade Yorkshire pudding with meat and onion gravy. Main course, homemade giant Yorkshire pudding filled with mashed potatoes, gravy, and a choice of fillings, sausages, roast meat, Caribbean jambalaya, steak and kidney, chili con carne, chicken curry. Dessert, Yorkshire pudding filled with creamy vanilla ice cream and a sticky toffee sauce. $29.95. Leslie, you do realise that is going to get a lot of people on here flying to the UK just for that. I mean, there are people I know on this channel who don't have passports, who are going to be getting passports just to come to the UK to try that. But this is also one of the points I was trying to make earlier about how I get, most of the time when I see people complaining about British food, they're in London and they're complaining about food in London. And I go, no. London is probably the place where, I would say also because of the cost of rents and everything else, etc., in the ground space, that causes there to be quite a steep gradient of food up and a lot more things, but a lot more stratification of the food in terms of the price point for the quality of food. Whereas, again, I go to my local pub. I've got one not far from me called Tricky's. Okay, it's a lovely place. It's also B&B. It has accommodations. Sort of more like a motel accommodations than B&B traditionally, but they've converted where the stables used to be into a massive sort of hotel conference suite, and then you get the food in the pub, and it's really nice. It's really nice. You basically walk in there, you are going to pay about £30 a head for free-ish soft drinks, a large, very large roast dinner, and a dessert, and a shared starter between about three or four people. It's very nice. I took some Canadian friends who came here to there and various other places. And the universal comment from all of them was, why is the food not like this in London? And I go, because of the circumstances of London. So that's the issue. But again, I know where to go get food in London. There is good food in London. You just have to know where it is. You're never going to find it if you don't know the place. I don't think, honestly, Zachary doesn't even an answer whether the Labour government would actually even fought the war in the Falklands War in 1982. So, ignoring that Hitler would never go for it, using hindsight, would Hitler declaring war on Japan work to force an American into retreat from the Atlantic, at least to some extent? It would cause them a nightmare. It would also cause Hitler a nightmare, because if he declares war on Japan, who's also fighting the British, he's got real trouble. He's got real problems. Because he's fighting the British, he's actually at war with the British, but he's now fighting alongside the British against the Japanese, and it just causes issues. And he can't really do much for that war either, because he can't get past the British to do it. It is going to cause a load of complications. It'd be quite fun to see from a theoretical perspective, but from a practical implementation perspective, not something we want happening at all. I'm going to stop taking in new questions now, because I've just noticed that I have to go by 10:30. So I'm going to finish off the questions though, but I'll just take that out. Seneca, what happened to the wreck of HMS Edinburgh? Did they recover the gold? Mostly they have. Was that last question from Seneca? Or were there any more questions after that? It could be the case of, yeah, declare as swordsman is important. It's not doing much is the point. The idea is just want to use and not be done. But the thing is, that could actually then hit him where it hurts, because if he's declared war on Japan to sympathy with America and then doesn't do anything, A, he's just broken up the tripartite pact, which he put a lot of effort into organising, and B, he's not getting the supplies from Japan, which he's getting some of the rare materials, which have been flown in mostly in various other ways to get into Germany, or actually mostly Japanese merchant ships have taken them to places like Spain and France, and they've been shipped from there to Germany. It's neutral to neutral shipping. But yeah, he loses that, and he's not really going to get access to anything from America. So it's kind of not going to help him. And then the Americans are going to get annoyed because he's not doing anything to help them in their war against Japan. That's going to be something which people like Roosevelt can use to stir up and just say, look, he just did this just to try and cause us, just to try and be smart. Yeah. It's an interesting point today. Anyway, with that being said, and with it being very nearly 2.5 hours, and with the fact that I will be in half an hour, need to be on something called Zoom, and having a long conversation which will hopefully come out for you next Wednesday, and hopefully all 4 of us will be there, because when we tried to record it Wednesday, 3 of us arrived. There will be 4 for next Wednesdays. And that'll be the Bill Trump's Christmas special for 2025. And the plan is to turn Bill Trump's, as I said, we're going to be doing specials. So Bill Trump's might not happen as often, but whenever there's a big event where we think it's worthwhile, we're going to try and gather the gang together and have a chat. And it should be fun. Thank you, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this video. As always, there will be a long patrol coming out about this later on, probably next year at some point. I still haven't recorded last week's live into a long patrol. I'm going to record both this one and last week's one into a long patrol. And they'll be scheduled up for next year at some point. So that'll be fun. And just thank you. I hope you're enjoying all the videos. And yeah, as said, if I will try to see if my friend, if she will do a video with me to talk about the economics, because it's quite a fun one to go through. But as said, I'd like her here because she knows it far better than I do. Take care, everyone. Thank you for watching, and hope you enjoyed.